Welcome to On The Moneyline, a podcast by MMA Play 365. I'm Newsom and I'm here to break down UFC Vegas 89, which goes down this weekend once again at the Apex in the UFC. We had one of these, average on paper at least, cards last weekend at the Apex. We've got one this weekend and I believe we've got one next weekend, and then we get the big UFC 300. So we do unfortunately have to go through a couple of these or a few of these weaker cards before we get to the one that we've all been looking forward to. But look, as I always say, and a lot of people, a lot of the hardcore fans say as well, fights on paper don't always mean a bad event. These types of events can usually produce some amazing fights, and yes, it's got no crowd and there's some positives. You can hear the coaches a little bit clearer, which is something I find quite intriguing. Obviously the strikes sound a little bit louder as well, so there are some plus points, but still nothing beats a stacked card with screaming fans. So yeah, like I said, a couple of these cards, few of these cards that we've got to sort of get through before we get to the big one, and yeah, we'll see how it all pans out. 13 fights on the card. This one as well, I feel, is quite an underdog-heavy card. I believe I'm picking like 50% or nearly 50% of the card as underdogs as well. So really interesting card from a betting perspective and really interested to break it down. But just before we get into the breakdowns, as always, if you want to jump into the action this weekend, add that extra excitement and extra enjoyment into the event, then make sure you do that on MMAplay365.com. We've got plenty under each subscription. Each subscription's actually exactly the same, to be fair. It's just a length, so you can either pick a next event, a monthly or an annual subscription, and for that you get all the handicapper advice, which is my betting advice, written breakdowns, fun parlays, the official bets that I'm physically putting my money on as well, if that's just what you want to do in regards to tailing myself. But also you get all the base AI predictions from our UFC prediction software, including like last weekend, for example, predicting the plus 500 5-1 underdog Vincent Peru beating Kennedy and Zechekwu, which is one that I definitely never saw coming, but the AI did, and fair play, because that was some prediction. And he got a couple of other big underdogs as well from the last card. Like I said, you get absolutely everything under all the subscriptions. Next event, monthly or annual, you just got to decide how long you want to join us for, and that's all on MMAplay365.com. But now let's get straight into the breakdowns. We'll try and fly through this as quick and as best as we can. In the main event, where we start, as always, we've got a 5-round women's flyweight fight between Amanda Ribas and Rose Namajunas. Now, I actually think this is a pretty interesting fight, and I think it's suited for this type of card just to see where both fighters are at. Namajunas technically is fighting down in regards to skill of opposition, level of competition. Amanda Ribas isn't like a super low step down though. She's still a quality fighter. But for her, she's having that step up, and the UFC just get to find out where both of these ladies are at. Namajunas, obviously former champion, and is still around at the top of the division, producing good performances, fighting the best of the best. So the UFC are going to find out exactly where Namajunas is at. But also from Ribas' side as well, Ribas has been around and been rising for quite a while now. She's had a couple of setbacks, but come back from that and is on a win streak. So again, I feel like the UFC just want to find out where she's at, and a Rose Namajunas is a perfect measuring stick to where a fighter's at. So how the fight actually goes down, personally, I think it's a fight that's won and lost on the feet. I don't think many people will dispute that. It wouldn't shock me to see a little bit of wrestling and grappling, I'll be honest. Ribas has got a black belt in BJJ. Rose Namajunas is a decent wrestler and a good grappler in her own right as well. So maybe we might see a takedown or two, but I kind of feel like it's going to be one of those situations where, regardless of which side gets the takedown and gets on top, I think the defense of both fighters is going to outmatch and outweigh the offense of each other as well. So basically what I'm trying to say is if the fight does hit the mat, I think if it's Ribas on top, I don't think she rolls all over Namajunas and Namajunas gets stuck and can't do anything. I think Namajunas will be able to get back up to her feet, but exactly the same the other way around as well. If Namajunas gets Ribas down, I don't think she's going to roll over Ribas on the mat either. And then, therefore, that creates a fight that's going to play out on the feet. Now, from a striking perspective, I do think Namajunas is the better striker and there is a real edge there. I'm not going to sit here and say that it's going to be a complete whitewash or anything like that. I do think that Ribas is going to be competitive in moments in this fight, but those moments I don't think are going to be enough. I think Namajunas is going to, her range management is super, super sharp. Like, she knows exactly when to stay on the outside and come in and strike, and she's safe when she does that before she exits back out. And I think it's going to be Ribas that's going to be the one that's working harder in this fight, trying to get into the range of Namajunas, pocket box, that type of performance. And I think it's Namajunas that's just going to be able to, again, just manage that range really well, circle, exit back out into the centre, that type of fight. And yeah, look, I think it's going to be difficult for Ribas. Like I said, I do think she's going to be, it's not going to be an uncompetitive fight. I think that Ribas is going to have some moments in this fight, but especially over 5 rounds, I find it really difficult to see Ribas just getting the better of Rose Namajunas, who's been here a million times before over 5 rounds. He's very solid over 5 rounds as well. And like I said, for Namajunas to lose this fight, either Ribas has got to find a submission, which I've already spoke about the grappling. I don't think that happens. She's got to find a knockout. And again, I really don't see her knocking out the better striker in Namajunas. So then you go into a decision. And do I see Ribas winning 3 out of the 5 rounds? I really don't. I think it's going to be a fun fight. I think Ribas is going to, get aggressive in there. But I think the level where Rose is at and the level of competition that she's been fighting over the years is going to show on the night. So for those reasons, I'm picking Rose Namajunas to win this fight. And in the next fight, the co-main event, we've got Karl Williams versus Justin Tafa. And this is pretty hilarious too. The Tafa brothers have done the old switcheroo on the opponents. If you remember, it was Justin Tafa that was supposed to fight Marcos Rogerio de Lima a few weeks ago, but Tafa had to pull out. I think it was like a leg injury. Must have been minor if he's back on this card this soon. And Junior Tafa was supposed to fight Karl Williams this weekend. So Junior Tafa stepped in on super short notice. I think it was like less than 24 hours notice, or it might have been just over 24 hours notice because he had to weigh in. He weighed in really late. And Junior Tafa fought Marcos Rogerio de Lima instead of his brother Justin, and then Justin's obviously took the Karl Williams fight for, his brother in the UFC. And yeah, the old switcheroos happened with the Tafa brothers, who are just fucking savages. Like what Junior Tafa did, stepping in on short notice, how he did, saved a fight, big card. Yeah, props to him. And again, props to Justin for jumping in for his brother here as well, again, saving another fight. And it's an interesting fight. It's a massive clash of styles because, look, if this is a 15-minute kickboxing fight, then it doesn't see 15 minutes. I think Tafa knocks Karl Williams out cold if it does take place on the feet. But the issue is, does it take place on the feet? Like, Karl Williams is a guy that he's fucking crazy. Karl Williams, like this fight is going to be exciting because of Karl Williams. Well, and Justin Tafa as well, because he's a straight up G. But look, Karl Williams is super exciting. Seems to have decent cardio. Defensively, not very responsible, but I'm sure that's going to come in time. He's still relatively new in the UFC, and I do believe he's a fighter that will grow. His ceiling still a little bit unsure of, from my perspective anyway. But yeah, look, Williams, I don't think will stand for too long with Tafa. He'll want to get close. He'll want to get a hold of him. He'll want to drag him down to the mat. And that's just where I think the problem is. I think Karl Williams will be able to get Tafa down before Tafa knocks him out. And does Williams get him out of there on the mat? I don't know. Does Tafa get back up to his feet? It's a possibility, but I kind of feel like it might be unlikely. I see one of two things happening here. I think either Williams is going to get Tafa down and get him out of there, or I think he's going to get Tafa down, not be able to get him out of there really, but then stay on top for the majority of whatever's remaining in that first round, come out in the second round. Tafa's going to be tired from, the wrestling and the grappling, and then Williams is going to get him down again, and that's when he's potentially going to get him out of there. But of course, all fights start standing, and before Williams gets anywhere close to Tafa, he has to mind his P's and Q's, because I'm telling you, if Tafa does start getting off on strikes, Williams is going to sleep, and that's what makes this fight so interesting. It's a volatile fight, but I am going to be siding with the wrestling and the grappling of Karl Williams over that knockout power of Tafa. Williams has just got to be smart. He's got to be smart in this fight, especially early on. Keep defensively aware, get a takedown, and then from that takedown, I think it's going to be all Williams. So for those reasons, I'm picking Karl Williams to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got two former prospects, in my opinion. We've got Edmen Shahbazyan versus AJ Dobson. And like I said, look, both fighters came into the UFC. There was a lot of hype on them. People were excited. Easily more from Shahbazyan's perspective than Dobson's, though. Like, Dobson is still only a few fights into his UFC career, but look, Shahbazyan came in and was steamrolling people, steamrolling fighters, knocking them out. Everyone was excited, calling him future champion, including myself. Look, you know, it kind of deceived us all, if I'm being honest. And, you know, Shahbazyan, it's kind of a fall from grace in one aspect, in one respect, but like, you actually have a look at the guys that he has lost to. Like, he lost to Derek Brunson. It was a bad stylistic matchup. It was a massive step up at the time. But then he lost against Jack Manson, Nasruddin Imavov, and Anthony Hernandez. And those are fighters that are at the top of the division. So, although I think the only reason why we're penalising Shahbazyan for this is because there was so much hype on him and people just expected him to run through a lot of fighters up until maybe the top 5, and then it gets a bit tough. But what actually happened is that was just an overestimation from the fans, you know, myself and a lot of other people, and he just wasn't there yet. And I think that's the only reason that he gets penalised for his UFC record, because like I say, you look at the losses and they are legit losses. They really are. So it's hard to really hammer him for that when most fighters around Shahbazyan's level are also going to lose against the fighters that he's lost to. And of course, his last win was Dolce Lungiambula, which is around the level that AJ Dobson's at. So I think I'm just giving a little insight into where I'm going with this fight, because look, AJ Dobson's got power and he's got a bit of wrestling, and I think that Dobson, from an overall fight perspective, being an all-round fighter, I think he hits a lot of areas really well. Again, at his own level, I don't think his ceiling's going to be up at like the top 10, 15, if I'm being honest. You know, I could be wrong. You know, I've been wrong before and I'll be wrong again. But just right now, I think it's a well-matched fight between two former prospects. But I just think the experience of Shahbazyan and the fact that he's only lost against the best guys is a relevant factor in this fight. And I think from a striking perspective, Shahbazyan's still got power, he's still got technique. You know, let's not forget that Shahbazyan was wrestling people as well in that initial run in the UFC, and his grappling looked really good as well. He only got sort of rolled over in that respect again when he stepped up in competition. He wasn't as good as a wrestler as Brunson. He wasn't as good as a grappler as Jack Manson. He definitely wasn't as good as a wrestler and grappler as Anthony Hernandez, but again, most fighters in the division aren't. So I do think in this fight, Shahbazyan's going to have a striking advantage. I do think he's got power still. I do think he's going to have a wrestling and grappling advantage as well. The only question mark just two question marks that I really have against Shahbazyan. The first one, cardio. He does seem to tire out. He always comes out fast and hard, but he does tire a little bit more than what you'd expect the longer the fight goes on. And secondly, when the going gets tough, does he mentally break in there? And again, we just don't know, because the level of opponent that he's fighting those types of fighters force fighters to break. They're that good. They're in the top of the division for a reason. You know, does AJ Dobson possess the same skill set as the fighters that Shahbazyan's been losing against to potentially break Shahbazyan? No, I don't think he does. I do think it's a competitive fight because, look, Dobson's got power himself. He's also a decent striker, decent wrestler and grappler. It's just in this specific fight, in this moment where both fighters are at, I think Shahbazyan has got a level of experience way over Dobson at this point, and I just feel he's slightly better in every single area of mixed martial arts, and that's where it's going to be difficult for Dobson, in my opinion. So for those reasons, I'm picking Edmen Shahbazyan to win this fight. And in the next fight, this is absolutely prospect versus prospect. Very similar to what we had last week, actually, with Isaac Dulgarian and Christian Rodriguez. We'll also be mentioning Christian Rodriguez in this breakdown also. And just why we've spoken about Dulgarian, you know, that was a joke of a decision last weekend. I actually had 3 units on Dulgarian myself, and I cannot believe that
2 judges scored round 2 to Christian Rodriguez. But look, that's a topic of discussion for another day. We've got this is the best fight on the card. 2 prospects here, Payton, Talbott, Cameron, Saaiman. And yeah, as far as this event goes, it doesn't get any better than this fight. It's going to be an absolute firefight between 2 fighters that are going to be high on confidence, even though Cameron Saaiman is coming back off that loss. And look, let's talk about that loss straight away, because I think that loss to Christian Rodriguez has aged beautifully for Cameron Saaiman. Because, look, Rodriguez has gone in there and he's beaten Bulgarian, who was a super prospect. He's beaten Cameron Saaiman, who was a super prospect. He was the one that beat Raul Rosas Jr., who was a super prospect. Like, Christian Rodriguez is a legit fighter, and I know he missed weight in 2 of those fights at bantamweight, but he is legit. And again, that's another point to mention. He was massively heavier than Cameron Saaiman, who Cameron Saaiman might be on the lighter side of this division as well. So I think that loss to Rodriguez, considering that Saaiman wasn't ran over, yeah, he was beaten unanimously, but Saaiman was in that fight all 3 rounds, and it was a high-paced fight. There was plenty of wrestling, plenty of grappling, and the wrestling and grappling isn't an area where Saaiman is predominantly, that's not where his MMA base is. Cameron Saaiman's come from a kickboxing background, a striking background, and picked up wrestling and grappling along the way. And to say that he was that competitive against Christian Rodriguez, who is a very good wrestler and grappler himself, yeah, like I say, that loss has aged beautifully for Cameron Saaiman. It really has. Now, Payton Talbott, he's a guy that, again, he's going to have a lot of eyes on him. I've heard a few people comparing him to Sean O'Malley. Might just be, the body type and the hair. But look, Talbott's a very calm, composed striker, straight punches down the middle, doesn't waste strikes, but can put a high volume of strikes together in over the course of 15 minutes. I believe he broke the Dana White Contender Series record for the most strikes landed in a Contender Series fight as well. So he's definitely got good volume. His cardio, he doesn't seem to be breathing heavy at all through a 15-minute fight, even when putting good volume together. The only slight question mark that I've got there is it's very easy for a fighter not to gas when they're in the area where they want to be fighting, which is striking for Talbott, and they're getting the better of their opponent. Talbott hasn't really had any real adversity. I know he's been caught and he's been dropped, but he's not had any pressure adversity where he's the one that's having to be forced backwards at times. He's not dictating the pace of the fight. And this is what's going to be interesting in this fight with Saaiman, because Saaiman does put a pace on. He will come forward, he will come hard, he will exchange strikes. He's got no problem in doing that. He's very good inside the pocket, and for as wild as Saaiman can be at times, he's also very calm and relaxed as well. So there's going to be a level of pressure and good striking towards Talbott that I don't believe he's seen before. And look, even though Talbott's fought a good level, fighters with good record, should we say, a decent level of competition pre-UFC, which you don't always see. Cameron Saaiman's been in the UFC now. He's had numerous fights, including Christian Rodriguez last time out. And if Saaiman fights this, to a similar ability against Talbott to what he fought Christian Rodriguez, then I think Saaiman wins this fight. I think that, look, Talbott, we yet to see. If Talbott comes in here and smokes Saaiman, or even gets in a war and edges Saaiman out across the 3 rounds, then at that point, yeah, look, Talbott's up there with the major prospects with a great ceiling. But I think that Saaiman is going to be a challenge that Talbott hasn't seen before, and the UFC are cleverly setting this fight up, in my opinion, to find out exactly where Talbott is at. But it's these types of fights that we've seen a million times before, where the hyper prospect comes in. And look, the reason I'm calling him a hyper prospect is this. A couple of days ago, this betting line was pretty much a dead even pick 'em, but the money's starting to come in on Talbott, and that minus 110 on Talbott is now minus 150 at some spots, and it might continue to grow. And to have that confidence in Talbott over Cameron Saaiman, who's UFC proven, who's just come off a close competitive fight with Christian Rodriguez, who's absolutely flying at the minute. Yeah, it's definitely warranted calling Talbott a hyper prospect because that's how people are seeing him. But I think that Saaiman is going to have a level of striking here that Talbott's not seen. I think he's going to have a level of pressure and wrestling and grappling that maybe Talbott's not used to as well. And although I think it is going to be very competitive, I think Talbott, he is, like I said, a calm, tall, sharp sniper type of striker. I just feel that Saaiman might just have his number in this fight. I'm looking forward to this fight. It's definitely going to be the fight where I feel is going to have the most controversy pre-fight in regards to people siding with Talbott, people siding with Saaiman. But for me, I'm on the Saaiman side. I'm picking Cameron Saaiman to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Billy Quarantillo versus the returning Youssef Zalal. So Youssef Zalal was actually released from the UFC, it seems, after his draw against Damon Blackshear. But Zalal, since there, has gone in there. He's had 3 MMA fights. He's had a boxing bout, a kickboxing bout, and just seems to have smoked everybody. So the UFC have brought him back in. And what a fight to bring him back in with against Billy Quarantillo. I think this is going to be fireworks. You know what you're going to get with Billy Quarantillo. He's a fighter that's going to be in your face. He's a fighter that will go everywhere. He'll strike, he'll wrestle, he'll grapple. But it's that forward pressure and the pace that he tries to break fighters with. And he's exciting, man. Like, look, at least every hardcore fan knows who Quarantillo is. He might be more of a household name to some casual fans. I'm not too sure. But look, Billy Q's ace, and I can't wait to see this fight because, look, Youssef Zalal comes from Factory X. He's in and around all these good guys like your Isaac Dulgarians, like your Jonathan Martinez, Chris Gutierrez, Brandon Royval. Like, the team that they've got at Factory X is just insane. And Zalal has always been a decent fighter. Like, you look at some of his losses and like one of them, Topuria, you know what I mean? Like, he's now one of the best fighters on planet Earth. So yeah, I think this fight makes a lot of sense. It's not as if they're bringing Zalal in to the lion's den for this fight. He's been in the UFC before. He knows what this is all about. He's earned his way back by smoking through everybody. And I think I've got a sneaky suspicion a lot of fighters like Youssef Zalal that have the second chance in the UFC tend to do so much better than the first time. And Zalal was never a bad fighter the first time anyway. So I think Zalal's really going to come into his own in this second stint in the UFC. But it's got to start with Billy Quarantillo, and it's not going to be an easy task for him. Zalal's going to have to work. He's going to have to chop down that calf kick, which, again, is starting to become a real weapon of Factory X as well. I know a lot of people talk about, American Top Team, and, those were apparently the originators of producing numerous fighters that adopted the low kick, but Factory X are in that as well. Like, look at Jonathan Martinez. That Jonathan Martinez and Jose Aldo fight is going to be insane, by the way. But yeah, look, these guys are good leg kickers, and I think that could be a legitimate weapon here for Zalal. I think, like I say, Zalal especially early is not going to have it easy. I think Zalal has got to use that first round, though, to just chip away at Quarantillo a little bit and just try and slow that pressure down. But I think Zalal's got a style to be able to do this. Like I said, it's not going to be easy. It's going to be highly competitive. I think it is going to be back and forth. But in fights like this, if Quarantillo can't break Zalal, it's going to come down to who's the more technical fighter, who's been picking the shots better. And for me, that's Youssef Zalal. I think Zalal's not going to get broken by Quarantillo. I think Quarantillo might take a round along the way. Zalal's definitely going to have to do a lot of work defensively, especially early on, and even a little bit later in the fight if he gets a bit tired. But again, Zalal's not got a bad gas tank, and like I said, I do think that Zalal's not going to get broken by Billy Q, and therefore it's going to come down to the better technical striker and the shot selection, which I think is on the side of Zalal. So for those reasons, I'm picking Youssef Zalal to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got newcomer Luis Pajuelo versus Fernando Padilla. And I think this is going to be a really interesting fight, a really good fight, an exciting fight. Luis Pajuelo is a fighter that is very much in your face, aggressive, will wing bombs, look to try and get you out of there. He's got a decent all-round game, but he's definitely looking to land big on his opponents and look for an exciting knockout. Fernando Padilla, he's more of a boxer in MMA himself. Does have a little bit of wrestling and grappling you've got to when you're at this level in the UFC, but primarily he prefers to strike. He will throw kicks from time to time, but he is definitely more about the boxing side. And this is where I think that Pajuelo's going to have a little bit of an issue because I think he's going to be smaller than Padilla. The range is going to be at a disadvantage as well on Pajuelo's side. And Padilla is really tall and long with his strikes. The one thing I will say of Padilla is he can leave his chin out there to be cracked. So he's got to mind his P's and Q's defensively. If he's got this tall man defense against Pajuelo, then Pajuelo's going to have a lot of opportunities to knock Padilla out. But outside of that knockout, I think the straight shots of Padilla, I think the technical boxing of Padilla is just going to be... He should be able to keep Pajuelo at range, at his own range, manage the distance really well, and just make Pajuelo work. But it's one of these fights where on your UFC debut, when you've got a lot of adrenaline ready to go, but you've got some nerves as well. And if things aren't starting to go Pajuelo's way, and he's starting to struggle a little bit with the range, then you might see him start to get a little bit frustrated, and in that frustration he might start overexerting himself, extending on shots, doing things that he wouldn't normally do out of that frustration. And that's where Padilla, I think, is going to be able to really start taking over the fight. I think Padilla's a good fighter. I think Pajuelo is going to be fun for sure, but I just feel that with the style of the fight predominantly taking place on the feet, both fighters strikers, Pajuelo a little bit more aggressive winging bombs, but Padilla a little bit more calmer with the straight shots, and Padilla being the taller, longer fighter, I think it plays into the game of Padilla, this fight, from a stylistic perspective, and also when you add in the physical advantages for Padilla as well. So for those reasons, I'm picking Fernando Padilla to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got a good fight here between Trey Ogden and Kurt Holobaugh. Again, this could be another entertaining fight. Both fighters predominantly grapplers, but both fighters that have definitely had to work on the striking to be in the position that they're in today. Because, like I said, in the UFC, unless you're an absolute specialist in one particular aspect of mixed martial arts, then you are going to need an all-round game. And even the specialist probably needs an all-round game anyway. But, you know, from their perspective, the striking has caught up to the grappling, and that's what makes it interesting. Like Kurt Holobaugh, he's aggressive, he's got power in his hands when he lets them go, and Trey Ogden is a fighter that the striking, I'm not 100% convinced that it's completely caught up to the grappling, but it's definitely at a level where he can be competitive on the feet at this level in the UFC. And Kurt Holobaugh is in around Trey Ogden's level, so I think Trey Ogden's his striking's going to be fine here. And the difference maker in this fight, in my opinion, is going to be the wrestling, because both fighters are going to be relatively even from a striking perspective. Both fighters are decent grapplers, but where I mentioned earlier with Rose Namajunas and Amanda Ribas in the main event, where both fighters' defensive work from a grappling perspective will be better than the offensive work of their opponents, I actually think it's the opposite here. I think that if Kurt Holobaugh gets on top of Ogden, I think he could be a bit of a nightmare. And I definitely think if Ogden's on top of Holobaugh, he's going to be a bit of a nightmare. So in this type of fight, it actually comes down to which fighter's the better wrestler, because whoever's the better wrestler or takedown artist is the fighter that's going to end up on top and be able to smother their opponent, even though they're both good on the mat. But I think Trey Ogden's wrestling's better, and that's where I think it's going to be. That's where I think the edge is in this fight. From a striking perspective, it's close. I think Ogden's maybe a little bit sharper with the straight shots. Holobaugh's maybe a little bit more dangerous with the power. But once the wrestling starts in this fight, I think Ogden's the better wrestler. Therefore, Ogden's going to have the top control time, and that's going to be where it's tough for Holobaugh. And we have seen Holobaugh stuck on his back, pulling off Hail Mary submissions. I don't think he pulls off a Hail Mary submission against Ogden. I think Ogden's too good for that. The control should be absolutely fine on the mat, and Ogden might even find a finish himself down there. So for all the reasons that I've mentioned, I'm picking Trey Ogden to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got an interesting one here between Ricardo Ramos versus Julian Erosa. Now, it's a tough one to analyse this fight because Ramos isn't as active as what you'd like him to be, and Erosa is so inconsistent. It's so hard to keep up with, A, where he's going to be at, and B, what type of Erosa we're going to see inside the cage. Like, Erosa will go on like a 2 or 3 fight win streak, winning fights that he'll be an underdog in, winning fights that you don't expect him to win. And then after that win streak, you'll be like, okay, Erosa's back on it. He's in form, and suddenly now he's starting to be a pick'em or a favourite. And it's fights where you expect Erosa to win because of his win streak and because he's been doing so well. And then he goes and loses in emphatic fashion. And that's exactly what we're in at the minute. Erosa went on a win streak, and then he fights Bruce Leroy, and you're thinking Erosa's going to beat Bruce Leroy, and then Bruce Leroy knocks him out, and then he goes in there against Fernando Padilla, and again, you think that, UFC newcomer fighting the veteran in Julian Erosa. Julian Erosa knows what he's doing. He's going to be good enough to put on that vet performance to beat a relatively green newcomer at the time in what Padilla was. And then he goes and gets knocked out again. Now, not knocked out, but he gets finished. Now, that fight, you can argue it was maybe stopped a little bit too soon. And I do think the referees need to know these fighters, because Julian Erosa is a fighter that, will go to the depths of hell and then come back, and, it's an exciting fight, and then he starts coming back, and the comeback's brilliant, and we're all getting buzzing for the fight and watching it play out of Erosa nearly getting knocked out to him, then starting to win the fight and break his opponent. So there's got to be a level of referees knowing the fighter, because that probably maybe shouldn't have been stopped. But regardless, on paper, he should have been there, and he wasn't, and he was finished by Padilla. So it's actually in these types of fights where Erosa, now he's fighting Ricardo Ramos. Guess what? He's an underdog again, because he's on a losing streak, and we're going to expect Erosa to lose. And it's one of those fights where we've seen it before with Erosa, getting that win and, grinding. I just have a hard time siding with Erosa, though. And again, I know I'm falling into my own trap here, and look, it's not going to be a bet from my perspective. I'll say that now. It's not as if I'm falling into a trap with money. Maybe I'm falling into a trap with a prediction. But yeah, look, it's hard to look. Ramos is a skilled fighter. He's a good striker. Wrestling, grappling's decent as well. And I think if Erosa wins, it's going to be because he breaks Ramos, and that's a possibility. We've seen it before. So yeah, look, it's a tough one to predict, and you might be sat here listening thinking, well, why aren't you picking Erosa? And look, the reason I'm siding with Ramos is just because, look, from a technical perspective, a skill set perspective, I think he's a better mixed martial artist than Erosa. It's just the intangibles do come into play as, what if Erosa does build into this fight? What if he can break Ramos? And like I said, they're intangibles, because you can't really put too much of, a factor on those types of things when you're analysing a fight, and the other fighter's the better skilled fighter. So yeah, I'm just siding with Ramos because I think he's more skilled in regards to actually being a fighter. But if he gets broken and Erosa just pulls off one of these performances that he's done consistently throughout his UFC career, then I'm not going to be surprised. But from a prediction perspective, I'm going to be picking Ricardo Ramos to win this fight. And talking of being ugly, dirty, gritty and grindy, we've got Cody Gibson versus Miles Johns. Now, Miles Johns stepping in on short notice, that's the first thing to take from this fight. And the other point in regards to this fight as well, Cody Gibson was supposed to be fighting Davy Grant, which, in my opinion, Cody Gibson has now got a massive step down in competition. I don't even think it's just going to be my opinion. It might actually be factual. But yeah, look, Davy Grant is, way better than Miles Johns. So Cody Gibson's got a slightly easier opponent. But look, Miles Johns is a, he's not going to be easy to beat. Like, Johns has got okay striking, it tends to be more of a winging bombs when it gets going, but he does have a decent jab, and outside of that jab he will throw the big bombs. So of course one can catch the opponent on the chin and knock them out. Cody Gibson's quite durable. Again, he's one of these rough, rugged type of fighters that are gritty, grindy, and will make fights ugly. And Miles Johns has a level of wrestling as well, but we're yet to really see a dominant or multiple dominant wrestling performances from Johns. And I don't understand it. I don't know whether he just struggles to get the reads on the takedowns, or if he just prefers to strike, throw big bombs, and, really wants to knock his opponents out. But I think it's not going to be like a super difficult fight for either side. I think it's going to be quite a close fight. But I don't know. I struggle to trust Miles Johns, and Cody Gibson is the type of fighter that can lose the first round and then, just keep coming forwards, like I just said with Erosa, and just break his opponents down. Now, the difference between what I'm going to say here with Gibson and Johns and what I said with Erosa and Ramos is, I don't think Miles Johns is like overly outmatching Gibson from a skill set perspective. I think it's relatively close. Whereas with Ramos, I think Ramos is definitely a better quality fighter than Erosa in multiple areas. But I couldn't say the same thing with Johns. I think the skill set is relatively even. And then when you add in the short notice and the fact that Gibson does have a style that could potentially break John's, again, it's one of those fights that's just going to be really close. It's difficult to analyse and break down because of the style of both fighters. Then you add in the short notice, and then that then starts bringing other, intangible issues in. So, yeah, it's a tough fight to break down, but I'm going to be siding with Cody Gibson. I think whereas I was on the other side of this type of fight in the previous breakdown, I think that Cody Gibson will be able to break Miles Johns, probably drops the first round and comes through this fight late. I'm picking Cody Gibson to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got the newcomer Stephen Nguyen versus Jarno Errens. Now, first, straight off the bat, I apologise if I'm absolutely butchering this name. It's one of these names that's actually quite common in mixed martial arts, and I've always had such a difficult time of getting it right. And I hear different commentators say it differently, different MCs saying it differently, so I just don't know which way it is. It's either Win or N-Win, I think, so we'll go with N-Win. But yeah, look, Stephen Nguyen versus Jarno Errens. Stephen Nguyen's been impressive. He's been on the Contender Series a few times, and he's got a good finishing record. He's one of these tough guys that will come forward. You can see that he's durable and he'll eat shots to give shots, that type of fighter. But I don't really see anything overly special about Nguyen. He's good at what he does. He's a meat and potatoes fighter. What you see is what you get, and he definitely delivers, and he's definitely dangerous. I'm not shitting on the guy. He's a good fighter, and he's in the UFC for a reason. He's not going to be a fighter that has his 4-fight contract, in my opinion. If it is a 4-fight contract, I'm not sure it usually is. He's not a fighter that's going to have his first contract and then get released. I think, he's a fighter that's going to stick around in the UFC, which means he'll get wins. But I just don't see anything overly special and exciting about him. He's got decent power and he's an okay fighter. And, I could say the same thing about Jarno Errens, but I just feel that this fight's going to be really close. And the thing is with Jarno Errens, he's UFC tested. He's fought some really good opponents. Sting Choi last time out. He's fought William Gomis as well, which is always going to be a tough fight. And he fought Gomis in Paris as well. I think that was the UFC's first event in Paris with the Parisian Gomis on the other side with the crowd going nuts for. So Jarno Errens has also been in Brave. He's got good experience, Jarno Errens, and he's a striker that's got a judo background, and his jiu-jitsu is not terrible either. But he's got power, Errens, and I think from a power perspective, it could be a case of this fight's even there, where it wouldn't shock me if Nguyen knocked Errens out, but it also wouldn't shock me if Errens knocked Nguyen out. But then when it comes to the other factors of the game, yes, Errens has got judo, he's got some grappling. Does he dominate and win from a wrestling and grappling perspective? I don't think he does, but I think he's able to really stop any flow of the fight and just break things up a little bit. And breaking the flow and fluidity of Nguyen might be enough for what Errens needs in order to win this fight. And like I say, look, I think the striking's close. I think the volume's going to be close. I think the power in the striking's close as well. But I think Errens is the more likely fighter to try and mix things up. And even if he's not overly successful, if the fight's really close from a striking perspective, then it might be that fighter who's scoring, the takedowns and mixing things up a little better that's getting favoured by the judges, should it go there. And if it doesn't go to the judges, then I think either fighter has got the same amount of chance of knocking each other out. So, look, I think Errens has got maybe the extra path to victory in this fight. Even though it's slight, it's still an extra path to victory. And for that reason, I have to side with that fighter. So for those reasons, I'm picking Jarno Errens to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Montserrat Rendon versus the newcomer Darya Zalesnikova. I think I've got that one right. That's actually the harder name to really sound out than Stephen Nguyen, and I think I've done probably a better job of Zalesnikova, if I'm being honest. So look, this is it's an interesting fight stylistically. I think that both fighters are predominant strikers. Rendon maybe has that additional path to victory in regards to the takedowns. It's going to be interesting to see if she tries to take Zalesnikova down, because I do think Zalesnikova is going to be the better striker here. Even though Rendon can strike, I think Zalesnikova's got better volume, aggression, accuracy. She's again, will be a fighter that comes forward to try and strike. She's fine in exchanges, and she'll actually get the better of exchanges as well. Like, Zalesnikova is actually a pretty decent striker. Again, when I went into tape, I expected her to be a wrestler just because of her name, but she's definitely more of a striker, whereas I think Rendon is probably going to be more of the wrestler and grappler in this fight. Now, it's not easy to get Zalesnikova down, and Zalesnikova's got a level of grappling as well. So, yeah, it's gonna be an interesting one for sure. The one thing with the wrestling and grappling that I do worry a little bit for Zalesnikova is it does look like Rendon is going to be a little bit more physical and stronger in the fight. Now, that's always one of those things, and I say this pretty much in every podcast, but that's always one of those things that's the hardest thing to predict in fights, because until both fighters are in there and you see them in the clinch exchange, there's absolutely no way of knowing which fighter's going to be stronger, because some fighters can have really deceptive strength, but Rendon does look like the bigger, thicker fighter, and yeah, because of that, I have to think that maybe, if I had to guess who's got the strength and the power advantage in this fight, I would be on the side of Rendon. And if she does, that could be a problem with the wrestling and grappling. But like I say, Darya Zalesnikova, she's got good striking. I think she's got good range as well. And I think if she's hurting Rendon and pushing her backwards and landing good strikes, it's really going to be tough for Rendon to get takedowns moving backwards. Rendon definitely needs to be moving forwards. And as long as Zalesnikova stays out of the clinch exchanges whilst she's pushing Rendon back, don't fall into the clinch, back out, gauge your range, then move back in. If we see that type of performance from Zalesnikova, then I think she's going to do a good job. And I do think that she's going to do a good job in this fight. I think it's going to be close. It's not one that I'm super confident in, but I do think the striking is the biggest edge that I've seen in this fight. I like what I see from Zalesnikova's striking. So for those reasons, I'm picking Darya Zalesnikova to win this fight. In the next fight, this is an absolute banger, but it's also very confusing to why the UFC have matched these two guys up. So we've got Igor Severino versus Andre Lima. Now, you might also see Igor Severino be called Igor da Silva. I think he is going with Severino for the sake of the UFC career. And Andre Lima, you might see him called Andre Makoste. But again, it's Andre Lima in the UFC, I believe. So yeah, Severino versus Lima. And what's really interesting about this fight, like I touched upon very, very briefly, is why the UFC are matching these two guys up. The two fighters that are coming straight off the Contender Series, so they're both making the UFC debut. They're both from Brazil. One's 8-0, one's 7-0, one's 20 years old, one's 25 years old. They're both fighters that people are actually really, hardcore MMA fans are really excited to see in regards to, how far they can actually go in the UFC, because they're so young and there's so much room for developing and they are improving from fight to fight. A lot of people are calling these two serious prospects. So it's very interesting to why the UFC haven't put both of these fighters on a bit of a build-up project, but instead, look, it's strange matchmaking from a matchmaker's perspective, but from a fan perspective, I fucking love these types of fights. I always say it, people get pissed off with prospect versus prospect fights. I love it. Let me find out who's better, because the beauty of it is whichever fighter loses, they're so young and so early and new in the career that it almost has zero effect on them, especially when their opponent starts firing up the division. It's a loss that ages well, and then they can meet later in the career for the rematch when they're both developed, they're both improved, they're both in the prime. I love prospect versus prospect, and this fight for me is an absolute coin flip type of fight. I can make an argument for both fighters. From Andre Lima's perspective, he's got tidy striking, Muay Thai background, but he's also trained in a gi and developed his jiu-jitsu over the years, and I believe he's a black belt now in jiu-jitsu, although, like I said, his bread and butter's within his striking. And then on the other side, with Igor Severino, the dude has got, great power, he's got great cardio. That cardio as well, let me tell you about his Contender Series fight. When he drops Janata Silva and he starts firing 30-plus strikes, trying to finish him and get him out of there, all I'm thinking when I'm watching tape, I'll be honest, all I'm thinking watching tape with Severino there is, for Silva's perspective, please survive, because what I really want to see is after that sort of barrage of strikes, the fight not stop, the referee not stop the fight ends up back on the feet, and then we can see what that does to somebody's gas tank, because 9 times out of 10, that type of barrage of strikes absolutely gasses an opponent out and then they start to fall off in the fight. Severino didn't. Severino was clearly tired, but he kept fighting through and finished him like a couple of minutes later anyway. But when he finished him, he wasn't huffing and puffing and throwing big winging shots, hitting and hoping. Like, the dude's got a gas tank. He's got power. I think he's the more likely fighter to wrestle in this fight as well. Decent level of grappling. So, again, I think it's one of those fights where I kind of feel that, you know, the wrestling and grappling may nullify itself out a little bit, but it's Severino that's the more likely to grapple. From a striking perspective, I think Lima's going to be cleaner, but I think Severino's going to be more efficient. I think the power's going to be on Severino's side. I think the aggression's going to be on his side as well. And again, go back to that Contender Series fight with Severino. That first fight was a very technical fight, and then second fight, Severino came out and thought, fuck this, I'm going to get this fighter out of there. Looked like a completely different fighter, turned it up, went through the gears and, you know, got the knockdown, barrage of strikes, got back up, finished the fight. So this fight's unreal. I think both fighters have got a massive ceiling. Like, it's a tough fight to predict. From Severino's side, I also like the fact that he's with Joe Anderson Brito as well. Like, again, fighters really young tend to adopt the style of, you know, their elder, if you like, the more advanced fighter that they're training with. So if Severino's going to be anything like Brito, then yeah, we've got an exciting fighter coming up. But then from Andre Lima's perspective, black belt in BJJ, legit clean striking. Yeah, it's a super, super intriguing fight. The fact, though, that I think the striking is going to be relatively close for different reasons. Like I said, Lima more technical, Severino more aggressive with power. The fact that I think that's going to be a very close battle from a striking perspective, and because I think Severino's the more likely to wrestle and grapple, then I am leaning towards the Severino side. The other point to quickly mention as well, I know I've gone into this fight a little bit longer than what I would normally do, but it's a fucking brilliant fight, is Igor Severino was a Jungle Fight champion at 19 years old. Now, Jungle Fight is a Brazilian promotion, very similar to like your LFA for the US and Cage Warriors for the UK. Like, Jungle Fight, when someone's a Jungle Fight champion in Brazil, you know that they're legit. You know that not only are they going to get into the UFC, but they're going to hang in the UFC as well. To do that at 19 years old is fucking insane. So, look, this fight's brilliant. Close, competitive. I'm going to be siding, though, with the fighter that I believe might be able to break things up just a little bit with the wrestling and grappling. I'm picking Igor Severino to win this fight. And finally, the last fight to break down. I don't even know why this is the first fight on the card. Like, this shouldn't be the first fight on the card. We've got Muhammad Usman versus Mick Parkin. Now, Mick Parkin stepping in on short notice. Usman was supposed to fight Huggy Bear, Chris Barnett, I believe. Yeah, shame to see Huggy Bear out of there. He's one of you know, my favourite fighters to watch. I just love that dude, the energy that he brings inside the cage. But I actually think this is a better fight. I think Usman would have completely ran through Huggy Bear, whereas this is definitely a more competitive fight. And yeah, look, you've got Mick Parkin. I don't know where his ceiling's at yet. I'm really struggling with Parkin now. I did cash him as an underdog on his UFC debut against Jamal Pogues, but that was half on, I know where Parkin's been training. I know the level of his training partners in regards to, you know, KSW heavyweight champion Phil DeFries and, of course, Tom Aspinall, you know, are two of his main training partners. So I know that he's getting good rounds in. And from that Jamal Pogue side, I knew that Parkin would be live as an underdog. I wasn't still sold on him absolutely destroying Jamal Pogues, because Pogues at the time was at Parkin's level. So, yeah, I knew that Parkin was live as an underdog, but I'm not sure where he's at in that last fight that he had against Mercado. Like, I don't know. Like, yeah, Parkin won fairly comfortably in the end, but, you know, Parkin was getting takedowns in that fight rather than striking. He was completely out-volumed by Mercado, but then Mercado also was able to reverse positions against Mick Parkin on the mat. And yeah, it just wasn't like, it was one of those performances for Parkin where I was just left a little bit confused after thinking, well, that wasn't like a super solid performance. And I'm sure Parkin was like a mine. I could be wrong with this. I'm sure he was like a relatively sized favourite in that fight as well. So yeah, I'm unsure with Mick Parkin. But what I do know with Usman is, look, Usman's not a fighter that I think will break into the top 10 or 15, if I'm being honest. That's my opinion. Again, like I said earlier, I always love to be proved wrong. And I've been wrong before, I'll be wrong again, but just right now, I just don't see it, and that's just my honest opinion. I'm not shitting on Usman. I actually really like Usman as a fighter because the dude just finds ways to win. He's not the most high, or he's not the highest volume fighter from a striking perspective, but he's got power. He'll fucking knock you out with both hands. He's got some form of wrestling. He was able to get Tafa down when he needed to, but he's also really durable for heavyweight as well. And he was able to take some big shots from Tafa to the point where I'm thinking, well, I'm not confident that Parkin's going to be able to knock Usman out if Tafa couldn't. And then when it comes to the wrestling, and I saw Parkin's wrestling compared to Usman's wrestling, I think Usman might be the better wrestler. And then with the grappling, it might be one of them where Parkin gets back up. But again, it's really difficult, especially with Usman on top of you. Even though he doesn't weigh in at 265 pounds, he's very athletic, he's heavy, he's fast as well. Like I said, the athleticism on the dude, definitely got an athletic advantage over Parkin. So, look, it's a really close fight. I could see Parkin landing, more volume than Usman over 3 rounds, staying out of dangerous situations, keeping the fight on the feet, and just outpointing him to a 3-round decision. But I could also see Usman potentially landing a big bomb and knocking Parkin out, or actually being finding out that he's the better wrestler in this fight, taking him down, or at least just pinning him up against the cage and beating him up. So I can see both sides of this fight. I think it's a very well-matched fight, very competitive. But again, I think that Usman might have that second path to victory. So for those reasons, I'm going to be picking Muhammad Usman to win this fight. And that's all for this episode of the podcast. As always, thank you for tuning in. Thank you for listening. If you're downloading the podcast on one of our podcast platforms, thank you for doing that. If you're on YouTube, you're always welcome to leave a comment. Tell me where we agree, where we disagree. Tell me who you're betting on. It's me that comes back to those comments, so I'll always try and reply. Like I say, my weeks are really busy with the other aspects of MMA that I'm involved in, but I always try and come back to those comments and try and have a conversation, and I always appreciate the support, the comments. And if you are listening on YouTube, please drop a subscription to the YouTube channel as well. It all really helps with the algorithm. And of course, if you want to jump into the action this weekend, then look no further at MMA Play 365. Like I said in the introduction, choose the length of your subscription, next event monthly or annual, but in each subscription you get absolutely everything. We don't separate the packages. You get all the handicapper advice from myself, and you also get all the Bayes AI predictions from our UFC prediction software. The packages are really affordable as well, $5 for one event, $10 a month or $99 for the year. So make sure you check that out, jump into the action, have some fun on the weekend. And that's all from me. I'm Newsome. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you again next weekend.